We have a nice audience here for you this evening, and we have lots of questions to get to. So first, I want to thank you for coming. We're really grateful to have you share your experience. Let's begin by having you just share how it is that you personally became interested in machine embroidery.
Well, I was working at the time for a uniform company in Tucson, Arizona, and I actually have a degree in fashion design and dressmaking. So I have all kinds of experience in all kinds of custom work and designing and that kind of stuff. And when I was working for the uniform store, company that they had doing their stitching for names and badges and things like that on shirts was taking 6 to 8 weeks to put a name on a shirt. And so I said, that shouldn't be. And I went to the local dealership and I checked out some machines to see if that's something that I could do. Because at that time, the home machines were just coming on the market. So this, I'm talking about 1990, probably 96, 97. And yeah, long time ago. And I talked to the tech because everything else I've ever done, I've jumped from a home machine to an industrial, just because I kept getting more and more people who wanted sewing done. So I talked to the tech and I said, okay, if I start doing names for this uniform store, what's that going to do to the warranty of the machine? And he said, it voids it. And so from that point, I said, okay, thank you. And I walked out of the store. Not that they didn't have wonderful products, but it wasn't going to suit my needs. And at that time, maybe 2 months later, I heard about a trade show up in Las Vegas. And at the trade show, they had all the commercial machines, all the commercial software, all the sporting materials. They had classes, training, business classes, everything. So for a year, I went to nothing but trade shows looking at different types of machines and software and everything before I jumped in. Because at that time, the software package I chose was $15,000 and the machine I chose was $45,000. So this was not to be a small investment.
No.
So now when we think that our software and machines are very expensive, comparatively to what they were, even some of the industrials, they have come way, way, way down in price. And it's really wonderful. Plus, we get more bells and whistles and lots more things to play with. It's been fun to see how everything has grown. So I did all that, and a year later, I was able to quit that job, and I was actually doing full-time commercial embroidery. So they
how fabulous.
Yeah, so they were giving me all of their police and fire uniforms and Southwest Gas uniforms. And with Southwest Gas, I literally got a box of 1,000 at a time. So it was a very lucrative business, and I was able to pay off my equipment in just a couple of months. It was absolutely amazing.
That is really impressive.
And it's just grown. The store was sold, and it was really funny because I was going to go to a job interview, and a friend called me and said, you have to go to Cactus Punch. They're looking for a project coordinator. I said, oh, I am not good enough. And my friend said, no, you got to go. And I said, okay, and I was, this is so funny. I was literally in jeans and a t-shirt because I had just come from helping my mother-in-law clean out her garage. I said, I can't go. No, I've already called them. They want you. So I went and I met with Lindy Goodall and Bill, and they were in jean shorts, and I explained the situation. She said, don't worry about it. And I was, like I said, going to another job interview. So I had samples with me, and they wanted to see the samples, and I was hired right then and there. So I was their project coordinator. I had input into the designs that were done and how the projects were done and the digitizing and all of that kind of stuff. From there, I went to work for, Lindy put me in touch with Darren Anderson at embroidery.com. And for a couple of years, I did webinars. And some little tidbit there is I actually met Kim Christopherson and her twin sister, Chris, who now have Kimberbell and My Girlfriend's Quilt Shop. So they were just starting out then. They maybe had a half a dozen or a dozen design packs. And now I just was in touch with them in Utah, and they have just purchased their second building, and they have grown gangbusters, and it's been so much fun to see. And from there, I was a member of the American Sewing Guild, and I asked Darren, I said, why can't we do virtual meetings with the American Sewing Guild? So we started ASG Online, and I was hired full-time by the American Sewing Guild as their educator, and I was with them for 8 years, and that led to another job with GroupWorks and also with Wilcom. So now I'm brand ambassador for Hatch by Wilcom America. So it's been a very interesting journey. One thing has always led to another, and more fun. So.
Oh my goodness, it sounds like an absolute blast. What year was it when you took the American Sewing Guild online?
Let's see, that would have been about 2005 or 6, somewhere in there.
Oh, how fabulous.
So we were kind of ahead of our time.
All right, well, we have quite a few people online, so we're going to jump into the questions that the audience submitted, Ramona, when they registered. Okay. So the first question we have is from Joan Finn, and she wants to know, when you download embroidery from Sweet Pea, can it be too complicated for a Bernina 770 QE to stitch out?
No, it can't be too complicated. And basically what you need to do is just follow the instructions for doing it. Most of those types of websites, they have you download it. You download it to your computer. And when I download to my computer, I download it to my desktop. That's just how I like to work, because I can find it immediately. From there, I unzip it, because most of them are zipped. And then I file it where I want to file it. And everybody has a different way of working. Most people I know don't do it that way. They will download right to their embroidery design folder or something like that. But because I do a lot of different work for a lot of different people, I keep my designs according to the design company. For me, that's just how I happen to remember. Other people will do it by maybe Christmas designs or dog designs or kid designs, something like that. So everybody, however you work, whatever works for you is how you should do it.
Okay, excellent. All right. Then we have a question here from Elizabeth Lewis, and she has 2 questions. What is the best practice for a test stitch out before embroidering a design?
The best practice is to do a stitch out. And you want to do the stitch out on the same stabilizer, the same fabric, using the same thread, everything the same, so that you know that that design is going to stitch out how you want it. Do I test every single design? It depends. That's my famous saying, it depends. I always test when I digitize a design or when I use a new designer. If I'm doing the same design over and over and over again, I may not test it every single time unless I have a problem. But what I do is use software to preview the design. And I also use software to preview the sheet that you can print out, because it will show the number of trims, the start and stop points, and that information tells you a lot. The best practice is to do that test stitch out though. And I know that a lot of people say that it wastes fabric, it wastes thread, it wastes bobbin, it wastes time, but you can use those samples for something else. If they come out great, wonderful. Use them in a quilt, use them in a baby blanket, do something with them, sit them in a drawer. If you're doing embroidery work for other people, you'll have actual stitch outs to show them quality work.
That's a really great idea. So as you alluded to, Elizabeth does think perhaps it might be a waste of time and materials. And she has heard in the past that doing a test with the letter B with your planned fabric and stabilizers might be a good option as opposed to stitching it all the way out. How do you feel about that?
That's not the same. The test stitch out of that is basically a tension stitch out. And actually what I do is I use the letter capital I, capital O, and capital H, because that will give you all of the X and Y coordinates that you need. But that's a tension test, not a sew out of a design. So it's always good to test your tension too.
Okay. All right. And then we have a question from Alma, and she has a 3-part question. The first part is she has a Viking epic, and she would like to know how to combine a design to let it stitch out one color without stopping between color changes.
All right. Actually, I went online. I Googled the manual for the Viking epic. It's available online, and I downloaded it and I looked at that. And there are grouping functions. So at the machine, you bring in the designs you want, and then you select them, and then you group them. The manual is searchable. So if you hold down, open up the PDF, hold down the control key on your keyboard, hit F on your keyboard, a little box comes up that's searchable. And all I did was put in combine, and it showed exactly how to do it. So it was really easy. And then the other thing is don't change your thread color, because if you're sewing it in one color, you just sew on through with your one thread color.
Oh, very nice. I didn't know you could do that. Okay, and then she wants to know how best to embroider on fleece or towels.
When embroidering on fleece or towels, the biggest consideration is the loft. Fleece comes in variable densities of loft. Some are really thick and heavy, and other are almost like a polyester flannel. They're very lightweight. You do need to use proper stabilization, and that is not only in the hoop, but also in the type of underlay in the design. So if you have a design that you want to use, but you have these little pokies coming out, you can use crosshatch underlay. Crosshatch is what it's called in the commercial world, and somebody renamed it knockdown. That took me a while to decipher in the home market, but it's basically the same thing. It's a crosshatch and it controls it. The other thing you can do is put down water-soluble stabilizer on top, and also a cover. There's these things that are almost like plastic sheets that are called covers. And if you marry the color of the cover product to the towel or fleece, then that will hold down your stitches, and then you stitch an outline and then stitch your design, and then you just remove the excess cover product. But that works really, really well as well.
Fascinating. Now, where would one find all of these supplies?
Oh, online. They have a lot of online shops. Local stores may or may not carry them, because a lot of them don't know, especially about the cover product, but they're online. They're available online. And please do not use shower curtains, things like that. They're not made for that. And I've heard of people trying to save a buck, and it's not worth it.
Okay. I would not have thought of that. Then Alma's third question is, what size needle is best? And we're going to presume that she means for the towels and the fleece.
Right. For towels and fleece, again, it depends. But if it's fleece, fleece technically is a knit. So use a ballpoint needle. Use what is appropriate for the density of the fabric and the thread type you use. You want to make sure that thread is going to go through the needle and not cause any shredding. So usually I will use a 10 to 12 knit ballpoint needle. And if it's thick, I'll go up to a 14 maybe. If I'm using a heavier thread, then I might start out with a 14. For towels, I use a sharp, again, 10 to 14, depending on the thickness of the fabric and the thread that's used.
Okay. So
needles, there's titanium and stuff. When I first started out, and this comes partly from my sewing background, I'm a little bit of a purist in that I use sharps on wovens and ballpoints on knits.
Interesting. And we did have one last minute question, since you mentioned knits, that got tossed in there. Any tips for stitching on knits?
the biggest thing is not to hoop too tightly. You have to let the fabric relax in the hoop. And that doesn't mean it should be sloppy, but you don't want to pull too tight, because if you pull too tight in the hoop, when it comes out of the hoop and relaxes, that's when you get all those puckers. Also use I call it a contradictory stabilizer. So instead of using a knit stabilizer, use like a poly mesh, a lightweight cutaway stabilizer. Personally, I'm not a fan of adhesive type stabilizers, and that's just me. Occasionally, I will use a little KK2000. That's my favorite brand for stabilizing things. But the most important thing is to have that fabric relaxed in the hoop. Let it accept the stitches.
And so when you're working through that process and trying to determine what is relaxed, do you need to just stitch those samples until you find your perfect combination there for the fiber that you're working with?
It's a technique of hooping. So what I do, I did a brain dump on the American Sewing Guild. So if y'all aren't members of the American Sewing Guild and you really want a good in-depth education on machine embroidery, join the American Sewing Guild and look at the videos that I put online. It's a whole series of videos, everything from needles and threads, how to hoop properly, all that kind of stuff. It'll probably be the best 50 bucks you spend this year. But basically, when you hoop, that's a two-step process. You open up the hoop totally. The inner hoop would fall outside of the outer hoop. So, and then you remove the inner hoop, put down the stabilizer, put down the fabric, make sure it's relaxed. Then you stick in the inner hoop and you tighten the screw just until you feel some resistance. And then you turn it usually about another quarter of a turn. That's, you got to kind of finesse that. Then you do what I call hooping for real. You take out the inner hoop, you absolutely do the registration, center the fabric in the hoop, and then you're going to walk your fingers on the inner hoop from the top to the bottom until you hear it just slightly pop in. And then you recess that outer hoop just slightly. And that will give you the best hooping pretty much on everything. So it's a two-step process. And again, brained up at the American Sewing Guild.
Fascinating. I have been doing it all wrong.
And that's the commercial way to do it, because when you're hooping, like my 1,000 shirts for Southwest Gas, I would do the first one, and then from there on in, all I had to do was use the same stabilizer, and I just pop it in, take it out, pop it in, take it out. I never had to touch that screw through all 1,000 shirts.
Wow.
So if you're doing a bunch of pillowcases that are the exact same pillowcase, once you hoop it properly, you should not have to change the hoop at all for the next dozen pillowcases you do. You might change the names, you might change the thread color, but as long as it's the same. And then the only time you have to redo that sequence is when you change something. So you're changing the combination of the stabilizer, or you're changing the fabric you're using, something like that. But if you go through that same process each time, you will have great embroidery.
That's awesome. Now let's talk about thread. How important is it to have good quality thread for embroidery?
It's extremely important. You spend a lot of money on your machines. Don't skip on the notions. It's like everything else. For instance, computers, garbage in, garbage out. A lot of the lesser known, shall we say, manufacturers of thread will oftentimes over dye in accurate colors. They have certain dye lots they work with. So if they have a navy that didn't come out right, or they have a red or a purple that didn't come out right, they'll over dye it black. And actually that over dyeing weakens the thread. So if you're using an off brand and there's a lot of thread breaks, it might be because of that. And that's pretty common in rayon threads and some cotton threads, not so much obviously with the polyesters because of the way they're done. But don't use inferior products, use really good quality products, and your dealers carry those wonderful products that are made specifically for you to have good quality embroidery.
Do you find that different machines have different preferences with the thread?
You know, I hear that a lot. I run everything on all my machines. And I have 2 compact commercial machines, and I run those at top speed with my metallic thread even. And I don't have any thread, but I'm using the proper needle. The digitizing is done properly, and all of that works together. And I have heard that some people have problems with some threads on their machines. And there's different ways that threads are wound on the spool. Some are crosswise and some are stacked. So the stacked ones, they're laid in, it looks like the threads are laying one right next to the other. And those need to come off the spool in a vertical manner. The cross wounds look exactly like that. They're wound one over the other. And those come off a lot of times horizontal, but a lot of times I just use the thread stand in the back. But always when I'm doing a stacked wound thread, it comes off vertical manner. Otherwise you get twists and turns, and that's metallic threads for the most part, and hollow shimmer. Hollow shimmer is a great one for that. If you try and do that, it just kinks and goes all over the place and it breaks. So it's probably that it's on the wrong thread spool.
Oh, very interesting. Cheryl just typed into the chat box, do you use a special needle when using the metallic thread?
Most times I can get away with a 12. With some of them, if it's a combination of a metallic and maybe a cotton or a polyester, I might have to go up to a 14. Some people are using the new titaniums. I haven't really tried those a lot yet, just a little bit. But it all also has to do with the tension, a good quality thread, and making sure your machine has been cleaned out. It's amazing what just one little piece of lint does. That can mess more of your tension and sewing problems than anything.
Okay, and then she just wanted to clarify, Ramona, a 12 or a 14 with a
That's what I use.
metallic needle?
Now, and something else, I always say it depends, because there's times, one time in particular, I was working on, I was testing my own design and working with something, and the only thing that worked, it wasn't an embroidery needle, it was a top stitch needle of all things, but it gave me the best stitch out. So when you know the rules, you get to break them, but you have to know why you're breaking those rules. And a top stitch needle has a sharper point and a larger eye. So it gave me a great result. So if something isn't working, try something else. And this is also too, where these testing of designs comes in, and it's critical because you don't want to be sewing along and having to stop every 5 minutes because the thread breaks, when really maybe all you needed to do was change the needle, finish your test sew out, and then going to your project, you know that you're going to have a good sew out.
Yeah, that does make sense when you think about it like that, because I've wasted hours frustrated with thread breaks when I could have just done the stitch out.
Right.
And saved all that frustration. Do you happen to have a preferred brand of thread that you go to time and time again?
It really depends on what I'm doing. When I did uniforms, ARC Poly was on the market and they went out of business. And I also used a lot of Isocord Poly for wedding type things like linens, heirloom garments, maybe a christening gown, something like that. I use Madeira rayon. Sometimes it depends on the color I need. Recently, I've started using a lot of glide thread. I love the way that thread runs, and it's made in the USA, so I love that too. It also depends on the use and the care of the project. So when I was doing uniforms for the uniform store, I had to use either Isocord or ARC because of the color, number one, but it had to be polyester because for the most part, they were sending their uniforms to the dry cleaners. And there's a great story there. The bike, this was Tucson Police Department, and I was doing their bike uniforms. And when I started doing them, one of the motor officers came up, or bike officers came up to me, and he said, look at this shirt. Why is it was supposed to be navy, and now look, it's light gray. And I said, okay, I know why it's doing that. He said, you do? And I said, yes. And I said, when I start doing your shirts, that won't happen. And so of course he had to test me, which was fine. So long story short is I used Isocord, a navy blue polyester thread, which when bleached won't bleed. And the other company that had been doing the shirts was using a navy rayon, which when you bleach with chlorine bleach, fades the color of the thread. So that was really fun. He said, "You're right." And I never did tell him why. I said, "You do your job, I'll do mine."
That's funny, Ramona.
Yeah, yeah, and on some projects, it depends on the use of the project and the care of the project, just like that little story about the police officer. But if you're doing a kid's bib or a child's romper, and you know they're going to get their knees dirty, or you're doing a blanket and they're going to be dragging it all over the yard, and everything's going to be washed often, use a polyester thread because rayon's really not going to hold up. Save that good quality rayon for some fun things.
Yes. So we have two quick questions about thread and then we'll move on. Somebody just wanted to clarify, Kathleen, what kind of thread did you just name? She didn't catch that.
Oh, I use Isocord, I use Glide, I use things that are in the store. I test new products. There's not one. Superior makes an excellent thread. Orfil makes another excellent thread. It depends on what I'm doing. And I've used cotton, even cotton quilting thread for stippling in the hoop, and then polyester for the design. And one thing, here's something fun. Superior thread makes a glow in the dark thread and color changing threads. And do get the glow in the dark off season. So now's the time to buy that, because if you try and find it at the end of September with Halloween coming and you want to do some fun stuff for the kids or whatever, you won't be able to find it. It's not in the stores and they sell out of it. So now's the time to get that stuff. And then the color changing threads stitch out almost white or a light, very, very, very light lilac or yellow. But yet when you stand out in the sun, they literally blossom. And those are much fun to use. And those are by Superior.
Okay, Superior is what I think she might have been looking for. And then the last thread question, does thread go bad with age?
If not taken care of, it will. And rayon, because it's a fibrous type of thread, and cotton, the same thing, they're natural fibers, those do break down faster. And I shouldn't tell you this, but I will, because we're all friends here. I have some threads that I got when I first got my machine in 1997, I'm still using. They're polyester threads. They're not rayons and they're not cottons. But you have to take care of them. Don't drop them. They actually bruise. It softens or weakens the spot upon which they hit your floor. Keep them in a cool, dark place. Mine are in bins, and like the glow in the dark thread and the color changing thread, I actually made a black fleece bag, and I put it in and it's a heavy black fleece. I put it in the bag, wrap it so it's protected. I stick it in a plastic bin, and then I stick it in a dark cupboard. So it's not exposed to light all the time, because it comes and goes. So you just get a longer use out of it. So it's a lot of fun, but do protect your threads, because you have an investment in those just like you do your machine. So take really good care of them. Keep them out of sunlight, keep them away from dust. Wrap those ends when you're done using them. There's a lot of products for that.
So when people offer you that big box of thread that they don't need, we should probably say no.
I don't know. I'd go through it and see what's good.
Is there a way to test to tell if it's good?
If you pull on it, like there's something called tensile strength in thread. So when you take it between your hands and you pull on it, if it breaks very, very easily, probably not going to be the best for you. Now, again, polyesters, you're going to get a whole lot more life out of than you're going to a cotton or a rayon. And you could run a test sample, see if it works. And again, are you doing something that's going to be an heirloom? Are you doing something that you expect a year out of? Those things, when I do embroidery, those things come into play in my mind if somebody gives me stuff like that. And I also ask them if they know, how long have you had this thread? When did you buy it? And see what they say.
Okay. So if you were going to buy a new embroidery machine today, what would your must-have features be?
First of all, I never shop by price, ever, ever. I purchase a machine with features that I want and I need, and I also want a machine that I can grow into. And I have never purchased a top of the line machine. There were just too many features and things I knew that I would never ever use. And bigger hoops are my favorite thing. I like being able to combine designs and stitch them out. And with larger hoops, you do have to watch stabilization because some of those corners are rounded and that's the weakest point. And when the machine is stitching, it will actually pull in the fabric at those corners. And again, you will have pulling around the design. So what I do in that case is I wrap the corners. It's called sports tape. So if you have a bandage on your ankle because you sprained your ankle and then they wrap it with that stuff that sticks to itself, it's called sports tape that you can find at the drugstore and stuff. But I discovered, thanks to my husband, the pet store has really fun colors in this stuff, and it's about 1/3 of the price that they sell it at the drugstores for. So it's the same stuff. So it's just, they call it pet wrap, but it comes in colors. So
That does sound fun.
yeah, and what that does, wrapping the hoop in the corners especially, it gives, it kind of fills in those corners, so it stabilizes the corners of the fabric in the hoop better.
Okay. So you're mostly then in regards to features, you want the ability to grow into it and machines that come with bigger hoops.
That's my thing.
Okay.
But everybody's
How big of a hoop should you be looking for?
My current hoop is 9.5 by 14 is my largest one. If you don't count my quilting machine. I just got a brand new quilting machine at the beginning of the year. It's an Innova that has something called grand format embroidery. So I can take my embroidery designs and actually stitch them out of my quilting machine. Now get this, folks, my frame for quilting is now 24.5 inches by 14.5 feet. And if you don't think I'm
an addition.
Now this is a pricey machine, but I've been waiting 15 years for this machine.
Oh my goodness, we're gonna have to Google that one.
Yeah,
that
I'm
is
excited. I just went to training on it last
super
week.
impressive. Okay, what, Ramona, is the most common challenge that you, as I would say an expert, would experience with machine embroidery?
I don't have too many now just because I've been doing this too long, and I like to experiment a lot. I like to, once you, like I said, once you learn the rules, you can break them. I think my biggest challenge ever was when I was first starting out and I had a golf pro come in and he wanted his name and some other things that, I don't know, tournament wins. I'm not a golfer, so I don't know all this, but tournament wins and stuff listed on his golf bag. If you,
wow.
Yeah, and they're solid at the top, solid at the bottom, very, very long, and there was this flap. So my biggest challenge was, how do I get this under the machine? Now, I did have a commercial machine, so it had an arm that sticks out, but even still, I literally had to hoop it, put it on, and I had to have the help of a chair to get it on there. But then as it stitched, I slowed the machine way down, and as I stitched, I literally had to hold the bag the whole time it was stitching because the weight of the bag would have just made that flap of leather pop out of the hoop. So that was my biggest challenge ever. Then
that's impressive.
Yeah, so the second biggest challenge, and this was my own personal challenge, I was writing for Creative Machine Embroidery. And I have a technique that I call spot on endless embroidery. And I did a jacket, and the design went from the back collar all the way around the front. It was like a bolero style jacket, so it had a curved front, and then it had princess seams, and every blasted design lined up exactly on both sides. So that's a technique I invented. People normally have registration marks in their hoops and do stuff. I don't do it that way because it's not spot on. It's close most times. And if you're really good and consistent in your hooping, a lot of times you can get it spot on. especially with today's machines and the eyes that they have in the cameras and things. But at the time I developed this technique, none of that was available. I had just, you know, a regular sewing machine or embroidery machine. So I had to invent something myself. And this was during cactus punch days. But so I like challenging myself a lot.
Okay. Be sure to let us know if you come across a challenge, a new challenge. And I just have to know, how long did you hold the golf bag for?
Oh my gosh. I know it was at least 35 minutes, if not 50.
Oh,
It was a long time.
wow.
Because I really,
wow.
it was leather and there was no room for error. And I did several test sew outs before I even attempted to put it on the bag.
And the customer was thrilled?
Oh, he was elated. He wanted to bring me another one and I said no.
Oh, go for you. Okay, what do you love most about machine embroidery?
I think I'm a technology geek. Anybody that knows me knows I love computers and technology. And for the most part, I do things in my head and then I do them in software to make them work out the way I want them to work out. I have control of the technology. It does not control me. I refuse to let it control me. I do as much as I can in my software before I even take it to the machine. And I love the way the technology allows creativity. It allows me to challenge myself. It allows me to do things that no one else has done. And if you've ever purchased Creative Machine Embroidery magazine, I actually had 5 covers, and one of them was December, I want to say 2 years ago. And it was actually a freestanding lace, actual child size 6 ice skate. So that was the biggest challenge and that was my own personal challenge. They said, what have you got in the queue, you know, that you think might be kind of fun? And I said, well, there's something I've been thinking about for 5 years and I think I've got it all worked out. So now it's just a matter of making it work. And it worked. First time out of the, believe it. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so that kind of stuff. And then I, 2 years ago, I did a Halloween cauldron that made the cover. And it actually is all these pieces you put together with brads, like you use in scrapbooking, you know, those things you stick through and the back prongs fold through the paper. And yeah, but it actually has a bowl in it with an atomizer and the water comes up and turns colors and all that kind of stuff. But I had to be creative about how I protected the freestanding lace because otherwise all of the water would have made the freestanding lace collapse. So I figured out a way. And those are the kinds of challenges I absolutely love. Nobody else is doing them. It's like, okay, what can I do next? But it's my personal challenge.
So fun.
It really is
reminds
fun.
me of installation art you're creating here. This real ice skates and smoldering cauldrons.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Are those, Ramona, is that what I hear people talking about that they call in the hoop projects? Is that what that is, or in the hoop project something different?
Those things, yeah, those things are freestanding lace. In the hoop means most of the project is completed in the hoop, if not all of it. So installing zippers, key fobs, all you'd have to do is attach a little snap or something after that. But for the most part, in the hoop projects are done pretty much all in the hoop. So you would have a line for placement of fabric, then you place down the fabric, then there's going to be a registration, pre-trimmed or trimmed after, and then it will walk you through the steps of putting down zippers or whatever is happening in that project. But everything is digitized, so all you have to do is hoop and go. Everything's already done for you except for cutting your fabric.
Wow.
Yeah,
now,
really
how do you feel about magnetic hoops?
They have their place. I have a couple. And the ones that are done now, you don't have to be, as long as you get a reputable one that's made for your machine, designs a machine, embroidery makes them, and there's a couple other companies, I don't remember the names, that make them, but they are tested so they don't interfere with the computer. It's not like the computers of years and years ago where you put a magnet next to it and it could zap the machine. Those components are now protected. And and how they make those hoops, I mean, they're not going to take on the liability of not having a product that's going to work with a machine. So you don't really need to be too concerned about that. And they are really, really great for people with limited hand capabilities. I have a friend who has really, really bad rheumatoid arthritis. She can barely hoop. And I encouraged her to get a magnetic hoop, and it changed her world. She was actually able to start embroidering again. So they have their place, and I use them on occasion, not too often. But for instance, if I have some, like a wool Melton coat, and I want to put something on, I'm not going to hoop that because it's going to leave a hoop burn or a mark that I'm probably not going to be able to get out, or a towel, something like that. So they do have their place, and I do use them when it's appropriate.
Okay, so we want to open up the floor at 7:15 to questions from the audience here. So I'm just going to ask you one more question, and then if we have time, we can finish up with the other questions. But I'm curious what type of software is needed then if you did want to start making your own designs.
Well, I'm partial to Wilcom. I've been using Wilcom products since 1997 when I first started embroidery. And the reason I started using them was for their keyboard lettering. You type in what you want. There's guidelines as to how small or how large you can make it. But even if you know what you're doing in digitizing, you can go beyond those boundaries. And it never fails me. And when I first started, I wasn't digitizing. I'd send out all my digitizing, but I was doing all my lettering. And it made the most beautiful keyboard lettering, and it still does. It's all patent pending, and they have the most incredible stitch processor. And I mean, transparency here, in case anybody did not hear, I am brand ambassador for Wilcom America and the Hatch brand software. And the Hatch brand is for home and home hobby businesses. So if you have a small business out of your home, and we even have some small retailers that are using it, that don't want to graduate up into the full E4 commercial brand. And it has some things that the commercial brand won't use or won't do, and vice versa. But it's got a lot of stuff. It's a full digitizing package. And I like it because the stitch processor, what you see on screen is basically what you get. And they have, it's easy to use. There's lots of tutorials and things like that. I have used a lot of other brands. I've tried Embrilliance. I used to work with, when I was with Cactus Punch, we used Viking software programs. I've tried FOF, which is like the sister to the Viking. And I've used, what else? Oh, Art and Stitch I played with, and the Floriani software. I used to help teach that with some American Sewing Guild chapter members and stuff like that. So I've used a lot of software packages. A lot of them have a lot of wonderful qualities about them, but for all of my work, I still choose Wilcom.
So Nancy asks in the chat box, what is the main culprit for loops on the top side of hooped fabric after checking for proper threading?
There's several things why that could happen. Number one could be tension. Number two, density. If you were to lay, say, 5 crayons on a table right next to each other with no gaps, ends meeting, points meeting, that is basically how thread should lay in embroidery. So if the density, if there's too many threads stacked in there, they can loop. Improper tension, especially with a polyester thread, if you pull on a polyester thread, it will spring back. And sometimes the tension on the machine is too tight. And so when the thread is laid down, it snaps back and causes it to pop up. Those are the two main things.
Okay. What can you do about the loops, Ramona? Is there a point where you just have to scrap it, or are there a few that you can remedy?
Another thing that might cause it is the stitch length is too long. So if you have a fill pattern and you've got a 6 millimeter or 7 millimeter stitch length, that might have to come down. That you could do in software. Check your tensions, do your test sew outs, all of those things, and make sure, first of all, that your machine is properly timed, cleaned out. That's another thing. Lint can cause those problems. Lint is just, every time you change your bobbin, clean out your bobbin case, even under that little spring, the backlash spring and the little plate on top. On the plate on top, run the corner of a business card underneath. Don't unscrew the screw. Just run a business card underneath, just the corner, and you'll be surprised there might be lint under there. Take off the throat plate, clean out under there.
All right.
Lint does a lot of, can cause a lot of problems.
Okay. Kathleen would like to know, do you stitch on organza and then fuse the result onto your articles or items?
Organza is really thin, so why would you be stitching on that and then fusing it? Oh, I know what you're talking about. All right, I know what you're talking about, I bet. Do you clean off the edges with a hot fix tool?
Maybe Kathleen, yes, she
Okay,
said
yeah.
yes.
Yeah, and there's designs that are appropriate for that. I've done that several times. That's fun to do.
Okay. And then I'd love to open the floor if anyone wants to actually ask Ramona a question in person. You're welcome to. I think you may be able to raise your hand if you want, or we can try just speaking, and then if we don't talk over the top of each other, that'd be awesome. I'll go ahead and let you unmute yourselves if you'd like to speak. Maybe not. Oh, do you have a question, Cheryl? I think you're still muted. No? Okay. All right. All right. Well, if you all do come up with a question, you're welcome to type it in the chat box and then I'll ask Ramona for you. But I'm going to go ahead and use our last few minutes then to ask her about her tips for both the new embroidery enthusiast, which would be me, and then the advanced machine embroiderer, which might be most of the people on the call, Ramona.
I hope so. I hope they're enjoying their machines and doing lots of embroidery. I'd rather do embroidery than anything else. All right, my top 3 tips for a new embroidery enthusiast would be, number 1, shop the dealer and then shop the machine. If you're not comfortable in the store, you're honestly not going to be comfortable with the support. And a person new to embroidery has to be comfortable with the staff and the knowledge that they're going to give you. If there's several dealers in the area, shop them all until you find a place that feels like your best friend's home. That's where you want to buy. They may be a single line or a multi-line dealer. So after you choose the shop, then find the machine. And what I like to do is research and then ask lots of questions. And the staff should be happy to answer any and all your questions. If they get irritated, you feel like that, they're rolling their eyes or whatever, keep shopping because that's not the store for you. The second tip would be don't skip. This is an investment in a hobby, which, believe it or not, might turn into a business. So don't skimp on buying the machine. Buy as much machine as you can afford and wait for sales. Many times around the holidays and Mother's Day, they have 0% interest for maybe 2 years, 36 months, whatever it is. And some dealers also offer great bundles, like a starter package of software. They might have stabilizer, they might have luggage, threads, upgrade on hoops, all those kinds of things. And don't skimp on supplies either. Buy the best quality that you can, and honest to Pete, you are going to enjoy this craft of embroidery so much more. And the third thing is take as many classes as you can from as many instructors as you can. There's a lot of great things on YouTube, good and, as we all know, bad. Learn the correct way to do things and then get your machine manual out and read it. You don't know how many times I get asked questions and it's all in the machine manual. Get the manual out and absolutely read it. Take a rainy weekend when somebody's doing football, if you don't enjoy football, something like that, and spend some time with your manual and machine and just literally go through it page by page. That's what I do. And that's what I'm doing with my quilting machine right now. I'm literally going page by page through the manual, reading the whole thing, then going back page by page again, and then operating the machine. That's how I learn best. I know not everybody learns best that way, but the reason I read manuals is because I'm afraid I'm going to miss something. There's going to be a little tidbit in there that's going to make my life so much easier and the quality of my embroidery so much easier, and I'm afraid I'm going to miss it. So that's why I'm a manual reader. And for the advanced embroiderer, basically the same thing, plus add digitizing to your repertoire. Digitizing is software is so much fun. And don't let the computer scare you. I always find people, when I start to teach them digitizing, they say, I can't do this. I don't know computers. And so I'll start asking, do you use WordPerfect? Yes. Have you ever used PowerPoint? Well, heck yeah, I use that all the time at work. Then guess what? You don't have to learn everything from the ground up. File, save is the same in software as it is in PowerPoint or Word. Save as, how you export things, save things out. All of that is going to translate into embroidery software. Oh, and another thing is you've already learned a lot about embroidery just by watching it stitch out, and also by sewing, because a 1 millimeter stitch length in embroidery is the same as a 1 millimeter stitch length when you're sewing a garment together, which normally we wouldn't use, but 3 millimeter stitch length is the same stitch length in sewing as it is in embroidery. So there's a lot of things that translate, and people get so scared. Oh, I can't learn this. Yes, you can. Trust me. When I started, I knew nothing. And it's taken me in a career path I never dreamed of. The other thing is watch out. Because when your friends and your family find out you embroider, you'll be in business before you want to be. That's all of that has happened to me. I started out, and you tell one person, or the police officers and firefighters I did at the uniform store, they would come and say, can you do Christmas stockings for me? I just need 6 by Christmas Eve, and it's 2 days before Christmas Eve. Or the neighbors come over and say, just this one thing. Well, you know how long that one thing is going to take, and what the rest of your time limit is. So if that happens to you, set down some rules from the get-go. Otherwise, people will try and monopolize all your wonderful talents. And then you start to resent it, and you don't want to be near your embroidery machine ever. So don't let that happen to you. But do be aware that once people find out you do machine embroidery, they come out of the woodwork. I don't know how, but they do.
What are your rules, Ramona? Like, let's say it's 2 days before Christmas and I ask you for the 6 stockings. What would you say?
Depends on who it is.
Okay.
Really, it does. And it depends on what. Yeah, I might do it. It depends. If it's a really good client, and this just, oh, my 6 grandkids are coming to visit, and I wasn't expecting them. I'd really like this. And they've been a really good client all year, and I have time to do it, I will do it. But I'm not going to go till midnight or 1 or 2 in the morning doing, 6 dozen stockings just because somebody else failed. I did that when I first started, but that's not a good thing to do. Do set your limits. But it's a lot of fun, and people appreciate good quality embroidery.
Oh, I bet they do. Okay, so I think we've covered all of my questions. Anyone else? Do you have any other questions for Ramona while we have her here and all her expertise? Is there anything, Ramona, that you would like to add that we didn't discuss?
Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this. It was a lot of fun, and I hope this will continue. Anybody have comments about doing this?
I wish that more people were up and their pictures were up. I think that we need some clarification on how to get on Zoom. I think most people don't realize there's a camera they have to turn on the bottom of their computer, or if you're on an iPad, it's actually at the top right-hand corner.
Yeah,
all these people are on the phone, then I've never done it on the phone.
Yeah, and I tried several times, and right now even I'm getting a Zoom error.
But this would be very unusual to have this many people not be able to get on.
Yeah,
I understand 1 or 2 might be a problem, but this size group of not getting on is very unusual. My whole book club gets on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see, Pamela, and 16 people on. So yeah, so I'm not sure. And maybe those of you that don't have your cameras on, if you could just clarify in the chat that that was your preference, or you actually needed more help figuring out how to turn on the cameras. That would be interesting. I too love to see faces, Pamela, so I'm with you.
I like to see the sewing rooms.
Oh, me too.
You don't want to see mine. Mine's a workroom. It's
It's all good.
human studio.
Well, I only see a couple people up. Virginia and Miss Taylor has, they see sewing rooms there.
Yeah, well, I'm in my sewing room. I'm head of a Hoopla Sisters group in Plano, Texas, and we just started doing Zoom 2 months ago. And there are videos, and there's a couple of really good YouTube sites that people can go out and learn how to set them up. So
Correct.
that might be something to share with people. But I know the other night I was on with our president and stuff, and some got on, some got off. We have tried 2 and 3 times to get in. So, you know, it's not exact all the time either. Sometimes there's glitches, I think, on their end.
Yeah. And I recently read just a couple days ago that the latest Microsoft update for Windows 10 has caused some major problems with Google and things like that. So
Not causing me any problem, and that's what I have. I just did the update 4 days ago.
yeah.
So we did get a few comments for you, Pamela. Kathleen just got her camera, so she doesn't know how to turn it on yet. She's gonna text her computer guy, and Nancy doesn't have a camera on hers. I too have heard the same thing. I work on a Mac, so I don't have a problem with that update, but I have heard that as well, Ramona, from some of the folks on the chats, that it used to work and now it doesn't work. So
Yeah, and like I say, mine is sitting here with a big fat error. So I'm lucky I didn't get kicked out again.
I am so grateful you didn't.
Yeah, I
It
got
could be
kicked
the
out.
fact that our hairdressers are on quarantine.
Oh, there you go.
Be mine.
You look pretty good to me, Cheryl. I got mine shaved right off.
Yeah.
You're back in the real world getting your hair done again.
Yes.
I'm
We
in no
all
hurry.
want to get back. That is for
Hello to
sure.
Plano,
Well,
Texas.
I can wait.
well, I want to thank you all for coming. It was wonderful, and we are seeing some more faces, Pamela.
This was
So you're-
enjoyable.
Somebody found they're probably finding the camera. It's a video looking camera, and I think people are looking for the word camera, and it's not there on most of them.
Oh, yes, yes.
It says video, start video or stop video, but it's a little movie camera.
Okay, and I'll keep that in mind for future chats, just to make a quick announcement. If you'd like to have your camera on, and they do have a Zoom intro kind of technology event that they're doing at the Element Health Club. If you want to sign up for that, if anybody needs help with that, I believe it's at 10 o'clock on Mountain Time, so you can check their event schedule for that, and they can walk you through that too. But we are out of time with Ramona. Ramona, I want to thank you so much. I learned so much from you, and I truly have been doing it all wrong.
Go join the American Sewing Guild, get on that online stuff and watch all the videos. Literally, I did a brain dump. It's those
I'm gonna.
you say so
Yeah.
myself. Yeah. And it will
That
show
is-
you all the things that I talked about today.
How wonderful. My machine will be so grateful.
And thank you to everybody for whoever joined in. I'm sorry I couldn't see you and you couldn't see me, but
You had a really nice
Thank you
turnout,
all.
Ramona. Okay, you all have a wonderful evening, and I hope to see you again. Thank you
Thank you,
again,
Andrea.
Ramona. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So long, everyone.